Hey everybody, my name is Nick Korte and you are attending If vSAN Powered the Matrix, last vBrownBag of the day. I know you're excited to be here because I definitely am. I work for a company called Staff One out of Dallas. I'm the network and systems engineer there. Got to give the legal disclaimer as you've seen. So here we go. Now, Laurence Fishburne wasn't available to be here today. I tried to get John Nicholson and a couple other people to dress up in a trench coat and sunglasses and they just wouldn't do it. So what if I told you that the Matrix runs on vSAN? Would that make you think differently about planning a vSAN deployment? Would that make you think differently about just spinning it up on whatever hardware you have and just playing around with it and then accidentally using that for production? So the goal here is, let's try and plan it as if the Matrix depended on it. You probably remember watching the movies when Neo met with the architect. And there's like this 5-minute period, if I remember correctly, the first time I watched it, I had no idea what those two guys were talking about because this guy uses such big terminology, right? Well, he basically said that Neo was a mathematical anomaly in the Matrix, and that was the complete reason for his existence. But what if Neo's goal was actually to help the architect build the Matrix right? To architect it correctly so there were no problems, because there are never any problems in IT, right? If you do things the right way. But you can avoid a lot if you plan correctly. So as Neo pointed out when he met with the architect, the problem is choice, or free will in the case of that movie. But if you're planning vSAN today, you do have a lot of choices. You can run a VxRail. It's got secret sauce mixed in there for hardware and software lifecycle management that makes things easier on you. You could use the Cloud Foundation that we've heard so many things about. You could use something from Hitachi that gives you your vSAN licenses, all the secret sauce. These are often appliance type solutions. Well, you know what? What's the worst thing about an appliance? It's an appliance. What's the best thing about an appliance? It's an appliance. There's also IX Systems. I don't know if you got to see their booth the other day, but they actually have hardware that'll run vSAN and you just bring your own licenses. I thought that was kind of cool, something I hadn't seen. Starwind. They actually run software vSAN. It's not VMware's vSAN, but you can run their software on top of VMware vSAN if you like, or on VMware vSphere. And then there's the vSAN ReadyNote. And that's actually the one I'm going to focus on a little bit more because these are cookie cutter templates that you can use to build your own vSAN infrastructure, maybe without some of the special secret sauce of the lifecycle management, but still it's going to come to you at a much cheaper price point. So it's decision time. Do you take the blue pill and wake up tomorrow and just not care what your infrastructure looks like? Or do you take the red pill, go down the rabbit hole, and dig a little bit deeper? When we say vSAN, in VMware's vSAN, we're talking about running something in kernel in the hypervisor. And it's this idea that each host has a certain number of disks in it, a mixture of spinning disks and SSDs for caching so that you get that performance, or you can do all flash. So we put things in disk groups. You need at least one SSD and at least one spinning disk in a disk group. You can have multiple disk groups per host. You can have more than one spinning disk in that disk group, and it can go quite large from there. And it works off this idea of failures to tolerate. So we are literally taking and decentralizing our storage from that old iPod, the inverted pyramid of doom, as I've heard people say, where the SAN's there and it's the single point of failure, and we are taking the storage, we're putting it in the host where the compute and the RAM is, and taking a little bit more risk off of each node in the cluster. Now, it scares me a little bit because now each host is running all this storage too, so I have to plan and make sure that I have the right level of fault tolerance. So FTT of 1 is what you normally start with in a vSAN cluster. One failure that you can tolerate, losing one host or one disk out of this disk group on a host made of SSDs and spinning disk, or just all flash disks if you're using them. So in the vSAN world, we think of objects, and objects are made of components. So a VMDK has components. And so in a RAID 1 configuration, you know that you had to have at least 2 drives and they mirror one another. Well, in the vSAN world, you're actually going to have 2 copies of your data, 2 copies of the VMDK on different hosts in different disk groups. And then you also need a witness to break that tie in case you have a failure. You don't have this split split brain scenario. And it's all based on storage policies. Like I said, default storage policy is one failure that you can tolerate. Disk stripes per object. So that means you're going to have your one copy of the VMDK on one disk in a disk group on each host. You can't actually control where that's placed because that's the secret sauce that is vSAN, because all the storage on all the hosts is pulled together in one data store that you're going to see and use. Everything is thin provisioned by default on a vSAN data store. You don't need thick provisioning because you're going to get that performance. I don't need to, I can if I want, but I'm not going to reserve any particular space. I'm not going to reserve any of the caching, because when it comes to caching, if you're using a hybrid vSAN, you get a 30% write cache and a 70% read cache. If you're using all-flash vSAN, you get 100% read-write cache. So the policy is already there if you're using the RAID 1 configuration. If you want to do it a little bit differently, there are other ways to build the policy. So let's talk about ReadyNotes. ReadyNotes are, I am choosing my own servers to make a vSAN cluster, putting the disks in them, getting the RAM, getting the compute that I want to make up this vSAN cluster. Maybe it's 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 4 nodes. We can go up from there. But there's actually a ReadyNode configurator all online for you. And I can pick my version. Of course, you want to pick the latest version. And I can pick my profile. They've made these cookie cutter templates for you that have a certain amount of RAM, certain amount of processor, certain amount of storage that you can kind of start from. It's not the Bible, it's not the gospel, but every component in these server configurations is certified to run on vSAN on this particular version. And that's what you want when you call support, right? You don't want VMware saying, oh, you know what? We can't support that because you don't have the right hardware. That's bad. Matrix won't run on that. So if I pick the all-flash 6 series right here, we can see how much raw storage it has. It has 2 12-core processors, 256 gigs of RAM, a certain size cache, a certain max IOPS. 60K IOPS sounds pretty good to me. I don't know about you. But hopefully, even before you did this, you profiled your workloads like you're supposed to, so that you know what kind of storage speed you need, you know, or have some idea of capacity that you might need, and how much RAM and processor you might need as well. If you didn't, go back to the beginning. So I can pick the template I want, and then I can pick the OEM I want. Maybe I'm a Dell guy. Maybe I like Cisco servers. Maybe it's HP. They have all those different kinds of manufacturers you can look at here. Well, I saw a webinar the other day, a really good one, and I would encourage you to go back and watch it if you want to learn more about ReadyNotes. It was basically about what you can and can't change when it comes to a ReadyNode configuration. Do I really have to have 2 CPUs in my server? The answer is no. Even though the ReadyNode comes with 2, I can go with 1 physical processor. Anybody have a choking point that was ever CPU? It doesn't happen real often. Nigel and I actually had a conversation about this before I came here. And it doesn't happen often. Maybe if you're using VDI, maybe you do that. But the number of CPUs is actually going to affect your licensing. Memory. I can add more memory than is shown there as long as I'm within that NUMA boundary and support of the server. I can change out a little bit on the caching and capacity tiers for my drives and get bigger and smaller drives. But even the drives themselves, the spinning disk or the solid state drives, all of those are on the vSAN HCL. So you got to make sure that you're picking ones that are on the HCL and are rated for the proper endurance and performance that you're going to need for what you want to do. Notice, I'm not supposed to change the controller. That's not a good idea. They picked it for a specific reason. They wrote the software for specific controllers. And of course, the NIC cards and boot devices, you can see there. There's the link to the webinar. You can go and check it out if you have time. And they went a little bit deeper in terms of disk groups. I can add more than 1 disk group. It actually helps my performance because then I have 2 caching SSDs in each host, okay? And either spinning disk or some other solid state drives in each of those disk groups for capacity. I think the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory, so we'll just keep on going. But again, there's a nice blog post on Virtual Blogs. Hopefully you follow that as well because it's very, very good stuff. So at this point, you picked out a ReadyNode, hopefully, because the vSAN hybrid TCO and sizing calculator is based on the ReadyNodes and the drives that are on the HCL and the controllers. And then there's a special one for all flash vSAN that you can go into and register for free and get some additional information and secret sauce there. And of course there's the vSAN HCL so that you can look a little deeper. Now, one thing that I actually missed when I was deploying vSAN is I forgot that I actually have to have RAM in my host to run vSAN. I mean, how many physical SANs run without RAM in them? Probably not very many, right? So it does take RAM on each one of your hosts to pull that storage together and actually run vSAN for you. So there's a great KB article about the algorithms and how to size that properly based on your cache and your capacity drives. You definitely don't want to overlook that in this process. So I may need 64 gigs of RAM in each host to run my vSAN cluster, but I only got 96 gigs. Oops. So you got your hardware. Hopefully you did a good job, you got the right stuff. Maybe you decided to go with VxRail and you skipped the ReadyNote, but I'm a ReadyNote kind of guy because it saves me money. Now, you got to buy the licenses. Well, okay, you got to buy vSphere licenses per processor. You got to buy vCenter licenses. And you also have to have vSAN licenses. vSAN licenses apply at the cluster level, okay? So I can have, just in the standard package here, I can do hybrid spinning disk and SSD for cache, or I can do all flash for that extra performance, but I don't actually get the deduplication and compression benefit of all flash unless I'm going for at least the advanced package here. And again, per processor, you knock that down to one physical processor in a 4-node cluster, that's a lot of money on the vSphere side and the vSAN side. Something cool here, you got this iSCSI target service. Well, what if you have servers outside the vSAN cluster that want to take advantage of that storage? Well, you can present that storage as an iSCSI target to servers outside the cluster too. Pretty cool. And you also have this RAID 5, RAID 6 erasure coding option. Well, I can use that to save space. So RAID 5 is going to be 1 1/3 the space. So if I have 100 gig VMDK and I'm using RAID 1, it's going to take up 200 gigs in my data store because I need a copy in each place. If it's RAID 5, it's 133 gigs. If it's RAID 6, it's going to be 150 gigs. So you may want that space-saving technology, but there's a slight performance penalty. But if you have all flash, it's not going to matter. And of course, you got this data at rest encryption option. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And the stretch cluster option. Maybe you want to put vSAN at multiple sites, but you don't want to have multiple vCenters. You want to manage it all from one vCenter, pull the storage across your sites, and manage it all from one spot. And don't forget the remote office branch office licenses here too, because you can get remote office branch office licenses in packs of 25. So I can have up to 25 VMs covered by this in multiple locations. So I could have 5 at this location, 5 at this location, 5 at this location, and the Robo license covers that. Once I get to 25 at a particular location, then I need to move up to one of these other licensed editions. You have a couple other options here in the licensing scheme that I just added, but they do have special vSAN licensing just for VDI. So if you do run VDI, there's a special license bundle for that. All flash, of course. It's over here, yeah. So networking. That's another place we want to make sure we do things right. If you're using a hybrid vSAN, you can get away with 1 gig Ethernet adapters, but they actually even recommend 10 gigs in that case. If you're using all flash, it needs to be 10 gigs no matter what. But you can actually share that network among vSAN management, vMotion, if you wanted to, in the 10 gig space. Remember also, if you're using HA, that the vSAN network is actually that host monitoring HA network in this case. And of course you have to have VM kernel ports for vSAN, don't forget about that. They recommend that you use link aggregation control protocol and the distributed switch. I don't know if you noticed, but on one of the other slides you do get the distributed switch in these licenses of vSAN, so you don't have to have Enterprise Plus to use vSAN. You can do vSAN with a standard switch, but if you get the distributed switch, might as well use it. Okay. Special networking requirements here for stretch clusters. That means you have vSAN data stores components in 2 different locations over some WAN connection, and you do have to meet certain requirements for that, so make sure and take that into consideration. There is no more multicast in vSAN 6.6, which was vSphere 6.5. or vSAN 661, which is vSphere 6.5 Update 1. If you're upgrading from a previous version, it shows you that you're all unicast now. Why did that happen? Because these big providers like Amazon, who are giving you vSAN on their cloud, they didn't want to have to design based around multicast. And of course, read the docs on the network design guide. Well, storage policies, we talked a little bit about that. In the RAID 1 world, that's mirroring, so 2 copies, but you need that third option for failures to tolerate a 1 because you need a tiebreaker. Same thing with RAID 5, it's a minimum of 3 disks when we normally think about it, so you need at least 4 nodes or fault domains. A fault domain can be a server, or it could be multiple servers. If you're doing a small RAID 1 cluster, you can start with 2 nodes. It's actually, you can do that without any routing or switching in between, direct connect. Better is 3 nodes, because if I kill 1 node, I still have that other copy. But in the 4 node world, if I kill 1 node, I still have 2 copies of my data on the other 3 nodes. Security and compliance. You've got vSAN encryption as an option here that you can take advantage of, but you do have to have that vSAN enterprise license and an external KMS server. And then you could actually use VM encryption if you wanted to, but that requires the Enterprise Plus license. That's a per VM basis, and you can do encrypted vMotion with it. Either way, you've got to have an external KMS like a high trust or something like that. And don't encrypt the VCSA. You're not going to have a good day if you do. Firmware matters. They talked about that in the vSAN performance troubleshooting while we were here. And in these newer versions of vSAN, it will reach out and tell you. Even though maybe you ran all the patches from Update Manager, there's still a firmware update out there you may have missed, but it's baked into vCenter. I can upgrade it from there, no problem. A couple of new things. The config assist is really nice. I like that. They've got the easy install it's baked into the VCSA installer. You can do that for a greenfield deployment. I love that. It puts your vCenter on the first host in the cluster and lets you expand your vSAN based on that. You can also do stretch cluster local failure protection if you want multiple copies of the data at one site, but still do another copy or another 2 copies at this site. You can do that. You can do high availability health checks. Look at your hosts and see the health of the whole cluster if vSAN's not alive. So in summary, think about one processor, make sure you size the cache appropriately, and a few other things here. Make sure you upgrade in the right order. Plan for memory overhead. Got a few resources here, especially the Virtually Speaking podcast. Those guys are great. They talk about vSAN quite a bit. License guide. Ready Labs is just like, it describes the program that these vendors had to go through to certify their stuff to work with vSAN. So that's it. If you have questions, feel free to contact me, and I hope you enjoyed.